Welcome to the Matthew Moran podcast. Here you will find a series of in-depth conversations with the world's best nature photographers, conservationists, designers, editors, writers, and publishers. You will get an insight into the lives of creative professionals and industry experts, and it is a chance to hear their stories, personal journeys, and how they carve a niche to make a living in a rapidly changing, highly competitive, but hugely exciting field. I've had the pleasure of working with many of my guests over the years and have learned so much from spending time with them and having conversations about what it means to be a creative freelancer, sourcing exciting projects, sharing skills through partnerships, and not losing sight of your goals and dreams. This podcast is my chance to share these conversations with you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Part 2 of my conversation with Joanne McArthur. So if you've arrived here first and haven't listened to part 1, please head right back and check it out. We don't want you to miss out. Here in part 2, we go into more detail about Jo's coping strategies after years of witnessing and photographing so much animal suffering. Jo talks candidly about dealing with PTSD, practicing mindfulness, and how humour is an essential antidote to what is otherwise a pretty grim job. She also talks about a new book that she and the We Animals media team are currently working on with previous guest on this podcast, Keith Wilson. This is definitely one to look out for next year, as it sounds like it will be the most comprehensive, historical photographic document of animal oppression ever produced. I was so excited to get to speak with Jo about her photography and hear her stories from the front line of animal advocacy, and it was such a pleasure being in her company. It's been and continues to be a great journey producing these podcasts, but I think we can all be guilty. Photographers, that's us, the content creators, of putting stuff out there with no call to action. So here's my call to action to you. You can help. Please visit weanimals.org/support to support Jo and the team's amazing work putting the invisible animals out there in the limelight. If you can't donate financially, spread the word. It'll take a minute to share, or 5 minutes to leave a review on iTunes. And if you're really inspired, and why wouldn't you be, now is a better time than any to go vegan. The January is just around the corner, just Google it. There's so much help, advice and support. And most importantly, there's a huge community to help you make those baby steps. As Jo said, now is a great time to be involved in animal advocacy. And to steal the phrase from our mutual friend Colleen Patrick Goudreau, don't do nothing because you can't do everything. Do something. Anything. Here's part 2. Enjoy. I wanted to move in to a little bit more about you.
Great.
We're going to go deep.
We're going deep.
We're going to go deep.
Deep. Okay, I'm ready.
This is like therapy for Joanne McArthur.
Are you going to therapize me?
Not
is that a word? Okay, let's do it.
So I know you get asked this a lot, and Google Joanne McArthur. There's great stuff out there. There's videos, podcasts, and about the work that you do and the effect it has on you, and how you cope with this. Actually, first of all, you could, I think, talk a little bit about that and your experiences and how you approach, how you deal with all the traumatic stuff that you see and you're going to see when you go into, a fur farm or a broiler chicken shed with 1 million chickens in. How do you just kind of have that out-of-body experience, if that's what it is?
Yeah, it is. It is that in a way. And honestly, this is a big conversation with a lot of different answers, and I answer differently depending on my mood.
Great.
Yeah. But to your last point about out-of-body experience, I'm there for an incredibly short amount of time, sometimes 5 minutes. I have gone across the earth to gain access and do a good job for the animals. And so there's no room or time for me to have a crying fit and to go through the experience of my own emotions. I'm there to do a good job. So that's how I operate when I'm working. It is upsetting and it's hard, but this is the MO when I'm shooting, and deal with my emotions later. In the beginning, I did not have coping tools. And so I needed therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, like many war photographers who are seeing a lot of suffering and violence. You sort of have to learn to cope, and there are tools out there now ahead of time. You can read books. There's a great book called Aftershock by Patrice Jones. You can equip yourself to cope, and you should, so that you have longevity in your work. War photography, animal advocacy, all sorts of these difficult things. Like, it's a revolving door of people coming in and out because it's really hard. So, whatever the crisis is that you're dealing with, you should try and do it for the long term because it's necessary. So look after yourself. So that's one answer. Another answer.
Well, I was curious about, you mentioned PTSD,
Yeah.
And were you aware at the time that you had it? Did you need help to kind of get it diagnosed, for want of a better word?
I realized at one point that I would wake up in the morning with the images haunting me, the individuals who I'd met who I'd not been able to help. And I remember distinctly one morning waking up and thinking about pigs in gestation crates. I was like, oh, this is not healthy. And so I was able to basically, it was around that time that I really started practicing mindfulness and not taking part in my emotions, like observing my emotions, observing my thoughts, rather than just participating in whatever dramas they wanted to pull up for me in that particular moment.
So put crudely, and it's the kind of the ultimate display of it's not about you.
Sure. Yeah.
It's
and
almost like, how people talk about, the camera being a tool to tell a story, and it's actually not about the camera. It's that's its function. It's like it's the camera, but it's also you. But then you have to kind of put yourself and your compassion in a way to one side. And like I think it's really interesting. You say it would be no good you going there and crying, and because then it would just be about you and your tears and your emotion and sadness. But actually, there's a much bigger picture to all of this.
There is, and yet that fact doesn't help people cope emotionally. It does happen to help me, but I'm one of many people. We all cope differently. So I often honestly want to tell people, like, it's not about you, it's about the animals. So just buck up. Just buck up and get out there, and suck it up, because other people are suffering way worse than you are. But that doesn't work for a lot of people. And I get it.
Yeah. So people have to go on their own journeys also, and they'll arrive at whatever point they do in a different way and in a different length of time. And
and then what I got to eventually through the PTSD and 2 bouts of depression and learning to cope and learning to deal with what I'd seen is just eventually coming to a place where I know that I can just do the best that I can do. And there is a huge crisis and a huge emergency for billions of animals that we are causing. But if I live in that panic, I'm just gonna crumble. And so learning to be okay with doing the best that I can do every day. And I know that I work hard, so just being okay with that. And humor is essential in the world, as we know. And nurturing your joy and having a life outside of the work that we do, whether it's, having a family or whatever a family means to you, can take many forms.
And also going to a sanctuary and photographing there.
Yeah.
So is that kind of your antidote to all the depressing stories? You see all these amazing survival stories in animal sanctuaries.
It has a double purpose. So shooting at a sanctuary allows you to, be peaceful and commune with happy rescued animals. But it also impresses upon you again, in an even deeper way, just how intellectually complex they are, and therefore how bad the situation is for all the others. So I do leave a sanctuary feeling refreshed, but also determined anew to fight even harder for all the others who don't have this luck and this privilege.
You mentioned war photography. And this year, there was a big exhibit of Don McCullum's work at the Tate.
Stunning.
Yeah.
Oh.
You saw?
Oh.
Yeah.
No
Incredible.
words, just moaning.
Wow. I mean, it was enormous and, quite obviously heavy to go through all of that. And I really loved, there's really beautiful quotes up on the wall about his work and how he coped and his approach. And there was a brilliant quote about, and it shows back in the day when in the 50s and 60s when he was doing this stuff, there were still camera geeks out there asking him what gear he used, etc. And he would turn around and say, well, you could give me any camera and it would look like a Don McCullum image. There'd be, perhaps some differences in quality, but I really loved that. And he was very much talked about it, the camera being the tool to tell the story. And going through all those horrors that he witnessed and saw, his antidote was, in a way, landscape photography. And so you kind of, at the end, you've got all these nice pictures of peaceful landscapes, mainly from the UK. And I wondered if you had did you have a sort of landscape photography, something completely different that you do to also deal with this?
Yeah, there are several photographers who have gone that way, like Joseph Kudelka as well went to landscapes, and I think Cartier-Bresson even went to painting and photographing lovely things. And people assume it's sanctuary for me, but I'm still at a point and at a level of energy as a 42-year-old where I still have I will allocate most of my time for this really hard work, but finding catharsis in action and in the change that's being created and the people who contact the team and I about what changes they're making or how they're feeling based on what we've seen. So yeah, action, continued ongoing action is the catharsis for me.
Yeah, it sounds like you're nowhere near close to slowing down.
I'm really energetic. That's an understatement. And we'll see. I mean, ask me again in 10 years. Let's sit down here, or 20 years, or 30 years. And but I mean, the investigative work is really exhausting, and I can't, and I don't just, do that for weeks on end anymore, sleeping on people's floors and couches and doing that. But I have a different way of reaching people now. There's more contributors to We Animals Media, but also I'm doing speaking engagements worldwide, and I'm mentoring people. And so there are other ways for me to continue doing the best that I can without being knee deep in pig shit.
Yeah, and it goes back to the kind of it's not about you thing again, because if your ultimate goal is to do this incredible PR job and campaign for the invisible animals, you can't do it alone. So you have to be a good communicator and learn and educate other people who are hungry for knowledge and want to be in your presence and learn from you and learn from your experiences. Then I can see that it's great that you've still got this energy and this drive, but opening up to all the different media that you talked about. Speaking is such a great platform to inspire people. You certainly did me when I saw you in Bristol a year ago. So whilst you're not slowing down, you're learning to be, a better delegator or branch out your work.
Yeah, and the We Animals team is good at that as well. Their skills are keeping us organized and well-paced. That is not my skill. So it's great to work with such fabulous, creative, intelligent, impassioned people to keep this not afloat, but like thriving. Yeah. So I'll be really look forward to seeing where we are in 3 to 5 years, and make sure that we have good funding coming in and great projects, ever better projects in film, journalism, and photography.
I can't wait. Yeah, it would be great, and we definitely have to get you back on for then for sure. I wanted to just go back a little bit because we just sort of touched on the books. There were two. I had a question about We Animals and the name behind that. Because it's an intriguing name, and how do you interpret that, or how do you want other people to interpret that? What does it mean?
I guess at its most basic, we are all animals. Yeah, and we forget that with the hierarchy that we that is so ingrained. That we forget that we are all animals. And so that is the title. I remember also there's some play on words there that I was thinking about at the time. We often refer to people in a derogatory way as an animal, you animal. And it was a way of, turning that back on us, like we animals. Look at what we are doing to the other animals. Yeah, it was a title that came to me easily when I first had this idea that maybe I will do an animal project. I didn't even think of the title, like it was just there. It was 1998. I was like, oh, it's We Animals. But titles don't come easily all the time.
They really don't.
And like with this third book that I'm doing with Keith Wilson, who you've interviewed, we are really laboring over a title, which we don't have yet.
Yeah.
And so this book, he and I are co-editing the book. So it's my photography, but it's the photography of probably 20 others as well.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's a tome of a book inspired by James Noctway's book Inferno, which came out in 1999. So he put together a book of decades of unflinching images from civil war, famine, genocide. It's like, a 6-pound book. You just hold it in your arms.
Wow.
It's like you could weightlift with this thing, and it's just black with the word Inferno embossed on it, which is the title. And I thought, I want to do that for animals. I want to do an unflinching historical book about what is and what should never again be. And so finally, all these years later, I'm doing this book of the best animal photojournalism in the world.
Wow.
Yeah, and again, it's not wildlife focus, it's not pet focus, it's the invisibles. And people aren't going to want this on their coffee table, but it's a historical document. It'd probably be a small print one, we'll see.
Yeah.
But it needs to be...
It costs a lot to make these things.
It does, yeah, it does. Yeah, it's for a museum, it's for galleries, it's a conversation piece, it's for the media. We probably won't, like I said, sell a lot of copies,
Sure.
but it's nevertheless an important book to make.
Yeah, and again, is it in the primary focus of this book is, when you have this idea, like with the other books, how do you begin to think about the contents, for example, and the chapters, and what photographer is going to have what story, or so and so is good at this, and oh yeah, what about these great images from this farm, etc. How do you go about organizing all of that and deciding on your contributors? It's exciting.
Well, that's why I'm here in London as well, is to work with Keith on the beginnings of the editing. So for months now, let me take that back. For years now, I've been watching what photographers are doing and who's producing good work in animal advocacy, in the field of animal advocacy and photojournalism, and taking note of them, building relationships with them, and eventually inviting them to contribute work to our book, Animals in the Anthropocene. And and so that's where we're at. We have a couple thousand images that we need to start whittling through. And we're identifying deficits in the work, like, foie gras is a horrific industry of force feeding geese. And we're like, oh yeah, that's a huge thing. A lot of people eat foie gras worldwide, and we don't have those images. So then finding those images, and foot and mouth disease, remember when that happened here,
for sure.
and the incredible images that came from that, of the burning of animals. We're like, oh yeah, that's really important.
So a lot of this is also picture research as well, trying to find the source of all these historical events.
And that's where we're at right now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, how on earth do you find time for all of this? It's ridiculous.
Full of energy.
Exactly.
Very motivated. So this is our first publication. Often we start by self-publishing and then we go, build a reputation and go to a publisher, but I'm doing the opposite. Yeah, we'll see how that works. We'll see if it's a good decision. I think it's the right decision for what we want to do for this particular project.
And are there also plans for, exhibitions and talks and that kind of thing?
Absolutely.
That inevitably go along with publishing a book.
Yeah, and my hope is that the wildlife and conservation community will welcome a project like this. It is definitely outside of the mandate of these kinds of conferences and this kind of work, but that needs to change.
Yeah.
And you and I talked about that, how the conservation world is opening up and broadening. And so my hope is that the work will be welcomed there, but it'll certainly be welcomed in the photojournalism world. And
I think that's so important, going back to the Wildlife Photographer of the Year, that this is, the biggest kind of holy grail. Any nature photographer wants to get their work in there, and you have twice, so that's a good sign, isn't it? That you're kind of creeping in there. They've opened up photojournalism categories, and
I love that you're saying I'm creeping in there, because that's actually how it feels.
Yeah, it's true.
Like, I got in.
Yeah, you got in.
I got this platform. Now I can talk about all the things I want to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's they do have a responsibility to tell these stories, and with the platform that they've got, the audience that they've got, it's huge. So I think it's natural that, and a good thing, that there are these crossovers and that these stories are being told.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. And as we have said, competitions like this would get left behind if they weren't broadening their scope and having a really honest look at our relationship with the natural world.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why this horrific image that I have in the competition this year is one of the winners, is because it's an honest.
Yeah, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that image, the story behind it.
Yes.
Because it is really gruesome.
It's really gruesome, and as Roz said, one of the head of the chairman of the jury, chairwoman of the anyway, Rosamund Kidman Cox said of the image, it is interestingly subtle and gruesome once you take a look and once you see what's really happening there. So
that's right. It's not all out raw kind of gore. You go in and you're intrigued.
Yeah, you're like, oh, look at these handprints in red.
Yeah.
Oh, these little children's signatures with smiley faces signed next to the handprints. And what that is the annual rattlesnake roundup in Texas, where they round up tens of thousands of snakes and they behead them publicly. And then they skin them publicly in a display of festivity and celebration. Shocking. It is. I felt like an island, honestly, walking around there. And then there's the snake eating contest, and then there's the Miss Rattlesnake pageant, and
it's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, this would be a good time to talk about this particular experience, because I've seen a number of shots from that shoot, and it's that half the intrigue of these incredibly powerful and shocking images is, wow, how did you get in there? If you go in there with your nice flowy scarf with lots of cameras, like, as people she's a liberal, she's going to expose us, she's you just walk in there, buy a ticket, and people love to perform in front of the camera. Is that what's going on?
That's it. Yeah. And with my work, sometimes I'm just buying a ticket to get in, and I'm there with the hundreds of other people taking pictures. It's like that with bullfights, rodeos, circuses, zoos, aquaria, etc. And so I just fit right in, and I stay. Usually by day 4, they're like,
why is she still here?
Why is she still here? Why does she have those big cameras? They're starting to look suspicious.
Yeah.
And she's not even like with a family or kids or anything.
Yeah.
She's just this creep.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I mean, that was the case. And while a lot of my work is done in secret or at night or investigative and laborious in terms of gaining access, it's not the case with animals and entertainment and at the rattlesnake roundup. And so it was so in the killing area, the snakes are beheaded, and then if you want to pay a little extra money, you can skin a snake yourself. So they tie the snake up, and they had even young children, as young as like 4 years old, grabbing the skin and pulling it down off the still writhing body of a snake. And some people were uncomfortable with it, and kids were scared, and sometimes a kid would cry, and a woman even passed out from it.
Right.
And yet they just sort of laugh and lovingly encourage people to take part and say, no, this is great, this is a celebration. And to amplify that, once your hands are bloody from skinning a snake, you can put your bloody handprints on a long white wall and sign your name next to it. And so that's the winning image of snake skins alongside all of these handprints. I very dramatically entitled the image "The Wall of Shame." I'm not sure if I regret that or not, honestly. It's such a dramatic title. I don't think it needs such a dramatic title, and nevertheless, that is what it is called. And it is a wall of shame.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it's incredible. I was thinking about what you were talking about with the kids, and as young as 4 years old, and that's shocking, but it's also unsurprising that these traditions continue, because if you get kids doing that kind of thing when they're that young, it's like, oh well, it's normal. This is like completely normal
exactly.
to behead and skin snakes, while they're still alive, and then they grow up and then they continue those traditions. So that's why, I guess, going back to the education part of your work, it's so important to talk about the other side.
Yes, yes. And kids, so many kids are naturally empathetic, and they see a problem in mistreatment and cruelty and killing, and yet they are very swiftly taught to ignore that, and that, Melanie Joy is a psychologist who coined the term carnism. It is an ideology, just as, for example, vegetarianism can be an ideology. It just happens to be the predominant one. And
so it doesn't get given a name.
Yeah, so it doesn't get given a name. Exactly. And so this is part of it. This is, part of teaching kids that violence is not only acceptable, but a cause for celebration in the case of the maligned snake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a funny one, isn't it? Because I think if you'd ask, any nature photographer out there, they'd bite your right hand off to get an image in the wildlife photographer of the year. And so I guess it keeps coming back to, maybe people would be like, oh, aren't you thrilled that your picture's in this great competition? And it must be a very different experience to you than someone winning, I guess, with a more traditional image of a, great behavior of a, cheetah attacking a gazelle or something like that. Do you have any kind of thrill when you get that email saying, you've won, or is it you done thinking, great, this is a platform, I'm going to use this is We Animals, these are stories, or do you have any kind of, can you access some, hey, I've won something, and pat yourself on the back too?
Sure.
Yeah, that's great.
I can. It's always good to be told that you've done a good job at something.
Yeah. Even something as raw and horrendous as that.
Well, for me, it is about the other side of it. It spells a degree of success for the point that I'm trying to make. And it's like, oh my gosh, okay, I've got this major award. That means people are looking and paying attention and considering enough to include this image amongst the 100. They're like, okay, the jury decided this was important enough and interesting enough to warrant this accolade. So really pleased for the platform.
Yeah. Well,
first and foremost. Yeah.
Congratulations again. That's awesome. Wow, we've been speaking for nearly an hour and 15 minutes. They always go so quick, these podcasts, and you feel like you kind of scratch the surface, but we can slowly start wrapping it up because well, we're going to have some food, which would be nice, and then ever energyless Joe is going to go back and carry on doing some work this evening. Yeah,
I have editing to do tonight and prep for the book editing tomorrow. I'll get some sleep in there.
My goodness.
Yeah. It's hard to sleep when everything is so exciting, this forward movement. And coming back to what you said about this is a good time to be doing this work. It's a historical time to be doing this work. I mean, it's hard to sleep.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's a really good time to be focusing on animal advocacy. Particularly with the vegan movement, it's something that's I've said before in this podcast, there's not a week that goes past without yet another article or scientific discovery about the cause of climate change and it being bad for your health, or being bad for the animals, and it's how long, for example, you've been vegan a while, haven't you?
16 years.
16 years. So probably 16 years ago, you may have had one choice of soy milk if you were lucky, and now it's like oat, almond, hemp. It's athletes being vegan, influencers on Instagram. It's such a good time now.
Yeah, there's so many reasons. There's every reason really to be on side with the animals, to be on side with the environment and our health. Not to get all campaigny about this, but coming back to, I guess, my role in the world and stuff, and it just feels good to be here and to be embracing the community that wants to be involved and is taking a step up and caring about all these things, which are just so crucially important.
It does feel good, yeah. And I think, you mentioned not to be all campaigny. It's such a tough, tightrope to walk when you are an activist, you're a photographer, you're telling these stories, you're a vegan, you are rife example for the right-wing press of just being a self-righteous, hippie, and, they'll probably pick holes in your veganism or whatever. But when, it's touched on this before, we're dealing in a world of photography and conservation, and there are so few of us who are doing this work that are actually vegan. And again, I'm sensitive about saying it because there will be people listening to this, and you don't want to kind of discourage them, but you need to plant seeds in a really gentle way.
Planting seeds is what we do. Yeah. And I have been pushy in my day, and it's hard not to approach others with the sense of urgency that I feel and that activists feel. That's why we're out there with Extinction Rebellion and all the things that we do, the sense of urgency, and with the knowledge that we're equipped with. You want to get out there and yell about it, but there are all sorts of great ways to approach people and ideas, and not only people, but ways to approach law and science in a way that will affect change.
Yeah.
I think I just went on a ramble there, but
it's totally fine. And I think it's also connected to what we were talking about earlier about just being or doing one thing in the machine that's sort of, moving forward in terms of climate. Well, we call it climate breakdown now, really. We're trying to influence that change of not calling it climate change, because that's what's happening, is a climate breakdown. And, not getting up on your soapbox and wagging your finger, but just doing it in a leading by example way, a planting seeds way.
And sharing knowledge, not telling people how to think and feel, but just sharing information. And one of the things that I love doing in my job is the humane education. We Animals has humane education programs, so I'm in schools. I used to do it a little bit less this year, but those 8-year-olds and those 10-year-olds, when you share information with them about how animals are treated in the world, kids don't want secrets kept from them.
Wow, that's a really kind of, touchy subject as well, isn't it? Going into schools, and how do you kind of handle that one, and your image selection and...
Yeah, all the talks are age appropriate, of course, but I'm able to talk about all sorts of things, like, where did the fur trim on your coat come from? Like, let's talk about that. And these are facts. And let kids think for themselves. And in Canada, the dairy industry goes into schools to talk about, to promote dairy. And there was one time a few years ago where I came in about a week later.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, okay.
Who organized that booking schedule?
This amazing teacher named Yasmin. And she had me speaking to her grade 5s. And I was able to say, okay, guys, like, I hear you had someone come in and talk about milk. So where does milk come from, and how long can a cow live? And they were like, 4 to 6 years. I'm like, really? A cow can live 4 to 6 years? And they're just giving all this information. I was like, well, actually, I've met a cow who lived 32 years because she wasn't killed when she started producing less milk. And they're like, what? Letting people in on information and secrets, that's the way I see it. And they're like, wow, we want to know the truth. Kids want to know the truth. People want to know the truth. Until they get older, and then it compromises their their steak habit. It's a little more complicated.
Totally. And and that's something that you do have to be. That's when the gentle approach is important, because someone who's been eating a certain way their whole lives, you can't expect them just to switch immediately, and that's not the point either.
I just expect people to think and to do their best. When I found out, the reason I went veg is because my mom moved out to the countryside, and she had a bunch of chickens who walked around the yard with the dogs and the cat. And just like the dogs wanted to be inside and socializing and sleeping on the couch, the chickens wanted that as well. I was like, oh my God, chicken is my favorite food. But now I can't eat them. I can't eat them. They're so smart and they're so lovely and complex. I was like, oh no. But I had the opportunity to learn, and I allowed it to soak in. And but the point is that once I realized I couldn't eat chickens anymore because they were smart animals, I really didn't want to give it up because it's so tasty. So I gave myself like a 6 month, like, okay, January 1st, you know,
Yeah.
January 1st, you have to stop eating chickens. We just see it as a hardship, and we see it as a giving up of the things that we are just so used to having. But it's not that. See, once I stopped eating animals, I felt more aligned with myself spiritually, intellectually, emotionally. I was like, oh, this is a gift I've given myself. This is not a hardship.
And it's a gain.
It's
That's
a
the other
gain.
thing.
It's a gain for me.
Yeah, it's
for
not
them.
giving up. It's actually a gain. And something I say all the time is that also diet-wise, not only is it healthy, but the variety of food you eat is just so much greater because you're not just going down your traditional, oh, I'll just have meat and 2 veg again. And even though it's so much better these days to be a vegan, you still have to work a little bit harder to find those places, to search out those ingredients. And that's fun as
It's
well.
worth it.
Yeah, it's a bit of
Yeah.
a hunt.
Yeah, it's not a deprivation. We just think that it will be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's awful as well, you mentioned that, you discovered that these animals were smart because, again, the default is that they're stupid. And, pigs are, well, we know pigs are very intelligent. We look at, animals like sheep. Oh, sheep are stupid. And this is prevalent right now because I'm reading this amazing book called Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are?
Friends to all.
Have you read it?
No, I'm going to.
You're
It's
going
on my
to.
list.
It's awesome. Yeah, I'm halfway through. And I've just read this chapter about facial recognition. And a lot of his work was around chimps. And exactly, sheep have this incredible ability. And I say incredible ability, it's unsurprising. They're sentient animals and they know one another from recognizing their faces. And again, it's this default of like, you see sheep in the field being herded or whatever, and they all look the same, they're all the same size. When you get up close, of course they're not. They are individuals who have feelings like we all do. And I've also really experienced that in the last 2.5 years photographing these foxes and watching these families grow up, and you see how different I can go into the allotment where I photograph them. There's 9 foxes there right now. I can tell them apart immediately, and that starts getting you thinking about why is our attitude, our default attitude, putting these animals down on a lower rung of the ladder. That's our default.
That is our default. I can't add to that. DeWall is a behavioral scientist, right? I do want to just tell this little anecdote.
Definitely.
About, I've met many chimpanzees in my life, and 2 of them had been rescued from behavioral research, and so they had adequate quote-unquote lives at a research facility, and then they were sent to a sanctuary. But these are chimpanzees who can sign. Wow. And so we are so used to gazing at animals, and they gaze at us, and there's very little communication. We know there's someone in there, we know there's someone complex and interesting and quirky, but like we don't know what they're thinking. And I met these chimpanzees who could sign to us, and so as we stared at each other blankly, the chimpanzee pointed to my friend's coffee and asked if it was coffee, with the word coffee. We had a translator.
That's unbelievable.
And then he asked, is there milk in the coffee? And then he asked if he could have the coffee but with milk. Okay, so that's how complex. I mean, that's not even like the tip of the iceberg, right? But you don't know what they're thinking. And then he started pointing to my friend's face over and over and gesturing the word pain. And he was asking in a question, like, are you in pain? Are you in pain? Pointing at his face. And we figured out that it's because my friend has these really stretched earlobes with the earrings in them. Yeah. And that was unusual to the chimpanzee. And when we get these insights, and we shouldn't need these insights, like we shouldn't need them to communicate in our language to us to understand that there's someone complex in there, but we do get these opportunities to see that, and it should be the default. It should be the default that there's someone complex there who deserves respect and autonomy, and that is not the default. And then to experience the questions, the queries that these chimpanzees had for us. Wow. I mean, I've had many experiences with animals in my life, and that was one of them that sort of solidified everything for me. There's so much going on there, and I need to do everything that I can do in this one precious life that I have to help them have a voice and help them have visibility and some more autonomy in the world.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I just absolutely love hearing those stories and reading this book. You just get like, there's such a buzz off of it. And also, I mean, there is, I agree that the default shouldn't be that they are stupid or that they are lower. It's not as simple as that, of course. It comes from also just not having the knowledge. And one of the things he talks quite early on in the book is basically bad science and bad testing on animals. So, for example, even putting an order amongst the ape community about which ape was the most intelligent. So they would do these tests with gibbons that are, tree-dwelling animals picking sticks up off the floor, which is something that they couldn't really do because they spend all their lives in the canopy. The apes could do it. The chimpanzees could do it, so the chimpanzees are more intelligent. That kind of thing is sort of a lot of the early part of the book is debunking, old science I think debunking's a harsh word, but just questioning, that and saying how you can't judge an animal in this way if you're doing bad tests.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we're so limited and we don't realize it. So that's a fantastic book. It sounds like people should be reading it.
Yeah, and very accessible. Text is fabulous. So I've got a couple more questions.
Okay.
And then we can free you up. And this idea that's come up quite a bit around, remaining hopeful in a time where, particularly in animal agriculture, you read a lot that there, big ag farms are going up, still at an alarming rate, even though there is this shift, towards much greater awareness around the sentience, around our health, around the environment. How do you remain hopeful with the work that you do?
It's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's not blind optimism. I'm very aware of the facts and the realities. And it's interesting that while veganism is on the rise, so is animal use. Mm-hmm. So is animal eating. It depends on the economy, the country, progress, quote unquote. Yeah. So I remain realistic, but I also have faith in human intelligence and our ability to continue to evolve in a compassionate way. And I mean, all I can do is do my best. Coming back to that conversation is like, well, I can only do so much, but I'll do my best to further that, to further our abilities to be better stewards.
Yeah.
And I could have an existential crisis every day about all of this, but I choose not to. I choose to put one foot in front of the other and to nurture people and to nurture change and to raise awareness.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and I'm going to take that advice on board as well.
Good.
Yeah, it is. I think that's something I'm learning more and more when you kind of roll your eyes in your head about another kind of totalitarian president being elected, or just the opening up national parks for drilling, and reading all these stories. It's a bit like, so yeah, you have to kind of carry on, keep moving forward, keep doing what you believe in, and take a few people along the ride with you as well.
Yeah, take people along. Yes.
So what's next for you? We've got the Wildlife Photographer of the Year Awards on Tuesday, which is exciting, and then you're back home. Do you know where you'll be going next?
Well, with the We Animals Media team, we want to continue to broaden our reach by examining the overlap of animal oppression and other oppressions and other issues. Animal advocacy and animal issues don't exist in a bubble, and they never did, and they shouldn't. I mean, they overlap with environmental issues and human rights issues, so let's bring all those things together. We have a film coming out about Palestine and animal advocates within Palestine.
Amazing.
Which is a really niche thing, and it's a beautiful title. It's called Nations of Their Own. Wow. Which is the double entendre there with Henry Beston's quote, and nations of their own being the people and the non-human animals. And
when can we expect that? When will that be released?
I'd say end of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, broadening our reach is what's next for me. And yeah, my focus has always been animals, but it's just more complex than that. So
Sure.
let's look at the complexity.
Yeah.
Let's bring more people in
I
and
guess similar
solve more problems.
Yeah, and similar to the wildlife issue is that you can't conserve animals without considering people
Yeah.
that are living on the edge of national parks, for example,
Yeah.
and use it for sustenance, etc. They're two are intertwined.
They're absolutely intertwined. One of our women in the Unbound Project is a gorilla vet, and she knew that if she wanted to protect the gorillas in windy, impenetrable forest in Uganda, she had to help alleviate communicable diseases in the surrounding communities. So she brought medical, health care to surrounding communities, and so that helps the people, that helps the animals, and everyone's happy.
That's amazing.
So we need to be dynamic and thoughtful in our actions and our strategies.
That's so cool. Joe, it's been so nice talking to you and spending time with you. I get such a buzz out of it. It's a real inspiration, and we will, I guess the best place for people to look you up, your website, joannemacArthur.com, is that right?
Or I would even go to weanimalsmedia.org.
weanimalsmedia.org. We'll put all the links up, and we will get this out to as far and as wide an audience as possible.
Thank you. And I encourage everyone to just use the images and share them. That's what they're there for. That's why I shoot them. Yes.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. So we'll do it again, and we'll have a look at what happens in that 3 to 5 year strategy of We Animals, of where you're at. I'm sure it's going to be a great success, and I'm really looking forward to following the journey.
Well, it's daunting, but I will do my best.
Great. And after a hard day's work, you've earned a nice glass of wine and a lasagna, so we'll go and enjoy that.
Let's do it.
Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
What a great way to end the year. Joe has left me feeling energized for 2020, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all my guests who've given up their very precious time to be on the podcast, and also you, the listener. I've received so many kind comments over the past year, and I'm truly grateful. And it also helps to keep me motivated to continue interviewing inspiring people in the natural history arena. And I've already got some great guest lines up for 2020. So as ever, stay tuned, keep in touch. Wishing you all a very happy new year, and I look forward to connecting again in 2020. Goodbye.